All right, everybody is now live on YouTube.
Leslie, I'm just checking audio. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay, great.
Casey and Pat, are you guys hot where you're at?
It's warm here in Bozeman, but the wind is blowing. I think a front's coming in, so it's cooling off.
Yeah, we're about 90, and yeah,
Wow.
that's why I'm red. That's with sunscreen, but we've been branding. But we're supposed to be in the 30s, well, low of 20 something come in a couple days. So we'll see.
Yeah, they're seeing inches of snow on its way to Bozeman.
Yeah, they're calling for that here too. I guess we'll see.
How many inches?
Just a couple in the valley.
Yeah.
More
Or
than
a couple
enough
inches
for
of
me.
moisture. Hey, Brian.
Hey, how y'all doing?
Doing well.
Brian, I think that was an interesting exchange last night. You know, after all that concern about the bill that it got vetoed anyway.
I think we're being recorded now too.
Hey, Pat.
How's it going?
Good.
Thank you for covering for me tomorrow, Pat.
No worries.
Hi, Pat.
How are you guys?
Great.
I always feel underdressed, Pat, when I see you. I feel as if I should go get spiffed up a little bit or
We all
something.
do.
That's my dad.
I'm wearing my finest Sims attire, just so you know.
I put a fishing shirt on because it's a fishing agenda.
Exactly.
I actually took off my Sim shirt to put this on. My dad always told me, you wear a suit to show respect for your colleagues and show respect for the institution. So in his honor, in memory, that's why I dress up.
Well, I don't see that much anymore, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
I work for a professional firm. It's about 15,000 employees. We got offices in 100 different cities. And even in the big cities like New York, Well, San Francisco's a little different. Depends on the city, but it's fairly uncommon for lawyers, accountants to suit up anymore. Or if they do, they'll wear the suit, but they won't have the tie on, and it's down to like one day a week now that you'll see anybody with a tie on. And it's usually when
Yeah.
they're prospecting. And then once they land the client, then they pull the tie off, So
Especially with COVID. I mean, you're lucky anybody wears anything but sweatpants lately, for the last
You
year.
know, I put on a jacket. I don't have a tie on though. So
I barely got in the house, so.
So how's your branding going? Are you getting close?
Oh, no, we just started. We brand about 10 days, so we got 2 under our belt.
Oh, long way to go. Well, good luck. Hope the weather holds for you.
Oh, I think we're gonna get a little break with the snowstorm, but that's okay. We need the moisture, so.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Becky, Hank?
Howdy all.
how's it going, Hank?
Real good, real good.
hi to all.
Hello, Becky?
Becky.
So Becky, are we ready to go or?
We're ready to go. I think everyone's here. You don't see Eileen on, but that's because she's with Eric in that little screen, I think.
Eric just popped on there a second ago, so.
Sorry, everybody. I'm on here. I'm with Eileen and Dawn as well. We're all in one spot here. So you have 3 of the fisheries crew. We're geared up and ready.
Quentin, you just put that tie on? You just left me 2 minutes ago. Now you make me look bad, buddy. Thanks a lot.
Oh, tie would look kind of funky with your shirt on, Hank.
I know. I know.
I've never wore a tie with a golf shirt, but
No.
it's worth a try.
So I guess we can just, everybody's ready. We'll just go ahead and get into this. This is the first one of mine, this work session. So we tried to make sure that we got this pretty well orchestrated. We've gone over what we're going to talk about and everybody ready. And if these are really efficient for the commission, we'd like to do them whenever you think you need one. But I also am cognizant of your time and what it takes to do these things and then participate. So like I said, at the end of it, if you need different ones or topics come up that you think we should have this, please let me know and we'll schedule them. Okay, so with that, Becky, you gonna take it from here?
Hank, if I could jump in
Yeah.
and cut Becky off. We were going to do just a brief introduction to drought restrictions and closures,
Oh,
if
perfect,
that's
perfect.
okay.
Yep, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. And again, just being kind of brief with this, since this has popped up last week. My name is Eric Roberts. I'm the Fisheries Management Bureau Chief here in Helena. And this, we were planning on briefing the commission on this topic. We figured it would be a big issue later on in the summer, but we had a flow-related closure spring up on us already last week. And so I wanted to just go through just a brief background of these drought restrictions and closures, and then kind of the process that we go through with those. And this started back in the late 90s and the 2000s. The department started working with a lot of our partners, watershed groups, landowners, ag producers, just to improve in-stream flows. And as part of sort of the shared sacrifice of water conservation, we made a commitment to implement fishing restrictions as part of that shared sacrifice. So ag producers, water users were giving up something. What are sportsmen and the department going to give up for it? And so that's kind of where these restrictions and closures started. The department developed a policy for when we would implement closures and restrictions related to either flow conditions or temperature conditions. And those started around the early 2000s and the mid 2000s. Ultimately, to actually implement those closures, we needed commission action. And so what was happening in some of the really severe drought years was the commission would have to meet, have emergency meetings or emergency calls several times throughout the summer. And it really just added time to what was already a sort of a time sensitive process. So about 2008, I believe, the department and the commission developed administrative rules to better outline and to streamline the process and to lay out when closures or restrictions would be implemented, what criteria would be used to implement those, and to put the current process in place that we're currently under. And so last week's was a fairly typical example of how these closures are implemented and when we get them going, when we get them online. What was unique is just the time of year to already be implementing a flow restriction closure in May is relatively unique. But the whole process is similar, regardless if it's May or July or August, when we typically see these. So just to walk through what happened last week, the Ruby River in the lower section from the confluence to the Duncan District Road fell below 5th percentile daily water flow on May 12th. Our local biologists and local staff conferred with water managers, and it looked like this was something, it wasn't just a kind of a flash in the pan type deal. It was something that was, these low flows were expected to stay in place for a little while. So the biologists got in touch with the regional fish manager. The regional fish manager then prompted us in Helena to let us know that they're looking at this river closure. They also let know the regional manager and also got in touch with the district commissioner. All of these closures or restrictions need sign off from the district commissioner. In this case, last week, this would have been Commissioner Byorth. The fish manager was unable to reach him. So from Helena, we reached out to Chair Robinson, who's sort of the next in the chain, and briefed her on what was going on. She approved us seeking this closure. Then we take it across the hall to Hank's office and get sign off from the director's office to implement the closure. We did put some criteria in that closure for next week. Whenever the Ruby hits flows of 20 CFS over 7 days, then we will work to lift that closure. There's really not much for flow criteria in the administrative rules as far as reopening a water, but when we start getting later in the summer, when we're hitting temperature criteria, there are some pretty specific criteria mentioned in there for when we'll reopen a water whenever temperature criteria are triggered. Really, process-wise, that's where we're at. Again, this is something where we're at flow-wise. There may be several of these through the summer. We will provide an update at each commission meeting. Again, by administrative rule, we're required to do that. We don't expect that to be very extensive. In fact, as much as I talked today is probably about 3 times as long as we'll typically do for a drought update for you guys, unless you do have more specific questions. I just wanted to take the time to walk you through this process that we have in place, and because it is something that we'll all be dealing with more throughout the summer months here. So with that, I'm open to any questions, or anytime you have any questions of these when they pop up here through the summer, when we're butting up against drought type conditions, we're always available for questions or anything that you guys need.
Mr. Roberts, I just wanted to, for the rest of them, I did ask you if it was monitored daily by FWP, so that if it does come back, then it can be opened in a timely manner. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone knew that.
Yeah, and Chair Robinson, that's a good point too, because closing the water bodies is much more rigorous than opening them. When we hit criteria to open, it's basically a press release and we go and take the signs down. People want these waters open, and so it's not a very rigorous process to open these back up to fishing again.
Should we just pipe in, Chairman Robinson? Mr. Roberts, just a quick question. Is your understanding just about the Ruby in particular, is it slow runoff and there's good snowpack, or is it because it's been so cool, or what are the circumstances that cause it to be so early this year?
Yeah, Commissioner Siebel, I think from my understanding, what's going on down there is it's already, the flows are low in the river itself. Typically by this time of year, the water users, it's below a dam. And so the water users are pulling water out, but typically we're replenished pretty well by tributary flows. My understanding is that the tributary flows are very low to no flows right now. And so that's what's causing this unique circumstance. As spring runoff increases into the Ruby, the expectation is that flows will come up here over the next few weeks.
Follow-up question, Mr. Roberts, with regards to water rights in situations like that, I know that we talked about it, and I think we did purchase some, we purchased some water, I know in previous commissions to be able to, or renewed some water purchases. How does the fishing fit in, or the recreation use fit in with the irrigation use of rivers like the Ruby?
For the most part, whenever we do have any water rights or anything, we're usually junior to the other users. And this is a circumstance too, where the downstream water users, they need their water too. And so in delivery of their water, and that's kind of where this 20 CFS comes to, the water users down there are also striving to get 20 CFS. And so when we hit that number, the water users are happier. We're happy because that's enough for the fish. And so it works out well for this circumstance.
Thank you.
Eric, just to make it clear, will you speak to what you mean by a closure? What is closed on the river?
Fishing. Typically, when we're closing it, there's not enough water or flows for floating or other recreation. The intent is to just allow the fish to find refuge, any sort of refuge that they can find in low flows or high temperature. And the idea is that fishing adds an additional stressor to those fish. And so that's what a full closure is. You will also hear us refer to hoot owl restrictions, and those are, you can call them partial closures, where fishing will be limited from midnight until 2 p.m. And then fishing is closed from 2 p.m. till midnight. And so what that does is it limits fishing pressure during the hottest portion of a day. And so that's what we do throw around hoot owl quite a bit. So you'll hear us use that term as well.
Thanks, Eric. And again, we understood, apologize if that surprised some of the commissioners. We did understand that for that Ruby circumstance that there was interest from some at least to understand that process a little more to come. And so we undeniably, we slipped that into the agenda, and apologize if that's, if we erred there, but we did think there was, again, we wonder if you might see that again in short order here if the spring stays dry and cold. That being said, Chair, we would look to you to start us down the communicated task, which is to talk a little bit about fish removals and restoration efforts.
Sure, I'll just let the staff go ahead with their updates, and then if there's questions along the way.
Thank you.
I think that's my cue, Director. Is that right? Okay. Hi, Commissioners, Chair, Commissioners. It's really nice to see you this afternoon. I've been asked by the Director to just go through briefly what my role has been with regard to these fish removal projects and how I looked at the question that came to me. And so I'll start by just telling you what's in your materials that was sent, that you received, I think via email, give you the context of the question as it came to me, and then just kind of go through how I looked at this and the conclusion I came to and the question that came to me. So to start with your materials, you have a narrative of fish removal projects in your documents. It's like the first 3 pages, I think. Then you see some details of projects that'll be presented to you in the June 24th meeting We will not be talking about those details here today, and I ask that if you have questions in those, that you actually direct those to the commission meeting in June 24th, because this is a work session that's not intended to be a decision-making or a deliberation on individual agenda items. And then the last piece you see, and more pertinent to my point here, is statutes and administrative rules that helped me see where we were to go with these projects. So I'll start then with just the context of the question and how it came to me. That was, the question basically came to me from the director's office: does the commission need to approve fish restoration projects? And when I started to look into that, I pulled apart fish restoration projects into two actions, both of which need to have authority through statute passed by the legislature in order for those actions to be taken. And those two, just for context for you, those two pieces are removal of a species from a stream, river, lake, and then introduction of a sport fishery, native fishery, and that also needs to have authority for the action. The focus here today will mostly be on the first one, the removal of the fish from the stream, river, lake. And that's because, for two reasons. First, because introduction of the sport fishery or native fishery into the stream, river, lake is pretty clear. It's fairly clear statutory authority or administrative law authority. So we aren't really focusing there. For that reason, and also for the reason that when we hear controversy from the public, it's usually removal of a species from a stream, river, or lake that causes that controversy, because it's a valued fishery, or it's there's a question about the means by which we remove the fishery from the water body, and that causes controversy. So we focus. Both my review and this presentation will focus on fish removals, but certainly we can answer questions about any of it. So when I started to look at the question of authority for fish removals, there are pretty specific statutory authority for fish removals in certain circumstances. For example, if there's a future fisheries project, and in the statutes, you'll see reference to 87-1-283, and it refers to the department being able to do habitat restoration, reductions, and I'm doing quote, reductions in species competition and natural reproduction. And so there's a pretty clear space where the department has authority to do reductions in species competition when there's a future fisheries project. Now, those projects need to be approved through the commission, and you've seen future fisheries. The commission has, Commissioner Byorth has passed future fisheries projects already and seen those come before the commission. There's another place, aquatic invasive species, that's not in your materials, but it's at 80-7-1008. That's another place where the authority lands with the department to establish a management area within which you can do a management plan that includes eradication of an aquatic invasive species. So that's another place where it's pretty clear that we can remove fish from a water body. There's another place where it's very clear that you can do removal of a fish from a water body, and that's at 87-5-17, and that's also referred to in your materials. And it talks about the department being able to exterminate or control wildlife. And you can read fish in there because it's specifically defined to include fish. The department can control or exterminate wildlife if the commission determines that the species poses harm to the native wildlife or plants or to ag production. So that's a place, again, where the department has authority, but it has to be done through commission approval of those projects. Now, those are really specific fish removal references. There are also another way you can get statutory authority, and that's through a broad grant of authority. And that's where the legislature says, for example, and very, very particular to the circumstance. The commission shall set the policies for protection, preservation, management, and propagation of wildlife, fish, game, et cetera, et cetera. That authority is very broad, and you can interpret under that the authority for the commission to set the policy to remove fish from a stream for the protection of native or sport fisheries that you would then reintroduce into the water body. That's the place where I think this commission has the authority to approve specific fish removal projects, and under which the commission will hear details of, I think, 14 fish projects. There's one last place I'll just mention, and we call it the assent language of our Dingell-Johnson federal dollars. That's a lot of words to just say. It's authority for the department to do fish restoration and management projects and use federal dollars, federal excise tax dollars for those projects, as long as the projects are defined and authorized by the Dingell-Johnson Act. When I look at the Dingell-Johnson Act, it specifically includes introduction of species, habitat work, research, regulations, but it doesn't mention fish removals. Now, I can interpret pretty broadly what fish restoration and management projects are, but if you're looking for specific reference to removals, I think the best place where we can ensure we have authority is to get commission approval for fish removal projects under the authority of 875715 or 871301. And that, I think, is in short the reason why on January 24th, you will hear of 14 projects that will request the approval to remove fish from various streams and lake. And I think there are some lakes in there as well. Now that's not the whole of the list, and you'll hear more of that from the fisheries division in their presentation. But that is kind of in short what I looked at and how I answered the question of whether or not these projects need to go to the commission. Either they have already been to the commission or they need to go under that broad authority or the specific authority for transplanted or introduced fish into the lakes and streams. So that's really what my presentation is for you. I know that's a lot of statutes and references, all of which I think, except for the aquatic invasive species, should be in your materials. And I'm happy to answer any questions on that as well. Quentin's already got his hand up.
Chair Robinson, Becky, I just wanted to, I think I think you referenced January 24th, just to make sure we're all on the same page.
Yeah.
It's June, it's this upcoming commission meeting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
June.
Thank you, Becky.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. No, we're not waiting till January. So,
Are there any other questions from the commission?
Madam Chair, I have a few for Ms. Doctor, if I could.
you can call me Becky.
Sure. Go ahead.
Thanks.
Mr. Byer.
Thanks, Becky. So I've spent a lot of time in administrative roles and statutes in my practice. And one thing I recall frequently debating is compulsory language versus discretionary language. And so, for example, in 201, section 201, we talked about the powers and duties. It says the department shall implement programs. So this is a compulsory, right? The department doesn't get a choice whether or not to do those things. And then in other places, it's permissive language. The department may. And it's also clear that there's two different institutions. There's the commission shall, the commission may, and then there's the department shall and the department may. And I'm a little bit unclear. You said that it appears that the commission probably should, or it didn't seem very compulsory. This is a discretionary choice on the part of the department to start doing this. Is that what I understood?
Commissioner, Chair Robinson, Commissioner Byorth, I don't necessarily see it that way. I think the question, the question is, does the commission have to approve projects. In the past, the interpretation of the authority of the department to do these projects without commission approval fell under, I believe, and I argued this, I didn't argue it because it wasn't actually a question in the Cherry Creek case. But in 2001, a case went to, about these fish restoration projects, went to the Ninth Circuit on a wholly different argument under the Clean Water Act. But we cited to the Ascent Authority for allowing us to do the fish restoration projects, including Piscocide removal of fish in Cherry Creek. And the reason we did that is because it does allow us to do fish restoration and management projects. So that's a broad interpretation of our authority to do those projects. If we want to do fish removal, though, there are several places where it's specifically mentioned by statute. And the argument could be the legislature knew where you were going to remove fish from a stream, how to allow the authority to be placed with the department. And it didn't do that. It did it with regard to stocking and habitat work and regulations and those, but it didn't specifically mention fish removals. So when I look at this now and the specific question about fish removals, I don't see specific authority. I see it under a general authority that includes commission authorization. So I don't know if I've answered your question except to go around it, but I mean to say, I don't see it as, I see it as an interpretation argument. And I do think that my opinion is that it's pretty clear we should go to the commission for fish removal projects.
And from what I understand, the former commission had approved 8 of them. So there was some that went before the commission to be approved.
Yes, Chair.
Go ahead with your follow-up, Commissioner Byrath.
So the reason this comes up is because it seems like it's a new interpretation. Like you said, you litigated this 20 years ago. I'm just surprised that at this point in time, right as we're entering the field season, that we saw the need to stop all these native species restoration projects that have been vetted by the department through NEPA. They've all, or NEPA or MEPA, so the National Environmental Protection Act or Montana Environmental Protection Act, through EISs or EAs. They've all been through public process. They've all received approval and go ahead through the regional supervisors. I'm just a little surprised at the timing now that we have to hold these up right at the beginning of the field season based on maybe a different interpretation of the statute. Am I missing something?
I see, Director. I was going to look to you, Director Warsack, on that because I think he was involved in the conversations about that.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Byron, yeah, that was a decision that we talked about. And the reason we looked at this is when we looked at 360 and talked about what we had to do, one of the commitments I made when I come on board was to look at everything we do to make sure we're following legally and it's transparent. So as I talk to staff and everything else on this, everything we do in this department that requires a removal or a takings, if you will, i.e. removing a tree from wildlife management area, removing any wildlife, goes through the commission. So I look at this and say, how can we go and remove a tree and have to go through a commission, but we can remove 40 miles of aquatic species under the go-ahead from basically a regional supervisor and a biologist with an EA. And I know they're publicized, they go through this, they go through all those issues, but I want to be more transparent. So I had groups that did not know we were removing that many fish or killing fish like that. And I just, once again, it's just to go in front of the commission to make sure that we're very transparent anytime we have a taking. That was the baseline for me to look at this.
Madam Commissioner or Chair, may I guess I don't mind as a commissioner being asked to approve or review projects. I mean, I think that's a good practice. What I'm more disturbed about is the fact that these that have all been vetted and many of which have gone through the future fisheries, are now held up at this time based on, you said or is it HB, or I guess Senate Bill 360, that doesn't say anything about that. It says strictly that the department shall review. Here, I'll read it verbatim so I don't chop it up. Here's what Senate Bill 360, the legislature's mandate to the department: a review of a state fisheries management plan. By January 1, 2023, the department shall complete a review of the existing state fisheries management plan. The department shall seek and consider public input in the process, including through actually extensive public meetings prior to June 1st, 2023. So I look at that and I say, well, good, we should review that management plan. The former commission passed it in April of 2019. It's been a couple years, it's worth a review. But to stall out these projects that are very expensive, involve it's extensive planning, years of planning, an investment on not only the department dollars, but an investment on outfitters, business people, landowners, all kinds of agencies, all getting together, building these collaborative process, and then have them interrupted right at the key moment does not seem to be grounded in policy or statute. It seems to be political. Mr. Director, you mentioned removing trees. It's in the statute. Removing trees is in the statute. It doesn't say removing fish must be considered. And so I'm not going to dispute Becky's legal interpretation. That's her job. What I am disputing is the political motivation and policy behind this for existing projects.
So, Madam Chair, can I respond to that?
All right, I'm going to quit muting myself. Please respond, Director.
Yeah, real quick. And I will tell you, I don't think there's anything politically motivated, and I actually take personal offense to that, sir. It's nothing politically motivated. It's a commitment I made to look at everything we did. And 360, you're absolutely right, was changed and has nothing to do with it other than the catalyst for us to look at these things and say, how are we supposed to do this correctly? We do that with every bill any bill that's introduced, we look at it and say, how do we implement this as passed if it passes? So in the beginning of House 360, we looked at that. That's how the discussion came up. And I will tell you from my perspective, I don't think this would have been an issue if it would have been in the same commission as we had before. Now there's a change in commission, and there's a question from different groups that are concerned about what's going to happen. This is nothing more than being very, very in front of it and people understanding the opportunity. It has nothing to slowing it down, deciding what to do, not to do it, picking a war against native trout, all these issues. Nothing is further from the truth than just being transparent and saying, this is when we're doing. When we kill a bunch of species, the people need to know about it. There may be an issue in one of these stretches that a landowner may have fished for brook trout, liked it, and his kids went swimming. Now we're putting this Piscocide in there and taking it out. And I don't know if he knew about it for sure or not, but I know if it goes through the commission, it's more public and they're going to see it. That's what the rationale was behind it. So that's why I did those things.
So, Ms. Doctor, did it go out for public comment so it will be ready for a decision in our June 24th meeting? Is that correct?
Chair Robinson, yes. There are 8 projects that already went through and already had approval through the commission. Some of those were future fisheries projects. The ones that are still needing the commission approval will be able to be implemented this season if it's approved at the June 24th meeting. And that has gone through the public process. Eileen's on. I'll let Eileen answer that question more specifically for details.
Chair Robinson, just to clarify, I understand your question to be, have these projects that need approval, have they gone out for public comment yet? That release has not gone out. The decision was made to wait until after this meeting. We have a draft press release ready to go. We didn't want to release it until after the meeting in case the commission wanted us to make any changes. The idea is we'll release those projects needing your approval. We'll release that for public comment. with the June meeting being pretty soon, it's right around the corner. We'll have that comment period open as long as we can in order to have the comments ready for you for the June 24th meeting. So no, it's not gone out yet, but hopefully by the end of today or early tomorrow morning.
Okay, thank you. And I guess my point is that it will be ready for us. Oops. I don't know, my internet's terrible today. So, but anyway, it should be ready for us to make a decision on our June 24th meeting.
I would appreciate hearing from other commissioners before that meeting if they have dissent over a given project. Director Warsick suggested that there's people that, their fishing hole or swimming hole is being affected. Is there a particular project that we should be aware of as we enter into the discussion? Because, I mean, is there an intent to delay any of one or a set of these so that we can't act on the whole package on the 4th or 24th of June?
Okay. I'm not sure who needs to answer that question, I guess, to see if there has been specific projects that.
Madam Chair, I don't believe there's any specific projects per se, but one of the things I do want to mention, and Eileen, please correct me if I'm wrong on this, but these were all issues that were in there before that did not have any removal in the plan showing that we're going to have fish removal in them. Isn't that correct?
I think part of Eileen's presentation was going to go through that.
Okay, okay.
I was, Madam Chair, Director, I was gonna suggest that perhaps it might be helpful for us to run through the fisheries part of the presentation. This is a complex subject and it's hard to really fit any of these into the one particular box. It might help your discussion.
Right.
Here, if you're okay with that.
Yeah, that would be great if you would please just go ahead with your presentation and then we can go from there.
Madam
Okay.
Chair, I have one question about the statute for Becky, and she can quickly dispense with it if she wants, and then I'd like to, I get out of the way.
Okay, that would be fine. Go ahead.
So in reviewing the statutes, again, we have discretionary and we have absolute necessity. And one that surprised me was that the commission must review the department's budget prior to submission. And I've been on the commission now just in front of 2 sessions and we haven't reviewed the budget. So it just, whereas we find that there's discretion where it doesn't appear to be discretion in the statute on the budget, but we see that there is no absolute mandate to do this for fish removals, and yet we're applying it as if it is mandatory. So if you have a response, great. If not, if you want to do some research, I'd appreciate response on why we're ignoring one statute and making up, or reinterpreting others.
Chair Robinson, Commissioner Byerth, you do review the budget every biennium through a presentation from, I believe, Dustin Temple does those presentations. And I can get you a link to the minutes for when those have happened during your time. I'm not sure. I think that probably was, maybe last year around this time or maybe a little bit after that. So I can get you reference to that, but we do apply that portion of the statute and we do not try to ignore any portions of any statutes if I'm asked about it or if anyone knows about it. And certainly, that is one that's right straight in your commission duties. So that is definitely one we do apply and ensure that the commission has a point at which they look at it. Not in any detail. I mean, you don't see any numbers detail, but priorities and all of that is what the presentation usually is. So I'll get you reference to that, if that's helpful.
Okay. Yeah, as long as we're just doing numbers and duties on fish management projects and it's at least consistent across the board, I guess I'm satisfied. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Eileen, would you like to continue with your presentation, please?
Sure. Thank you, Becky. Commissioners, good afternoon. So now that we're getting clearer direction on the authority question and the need for commission approval, what the Fisheries Division had asked for was time with the commission to give you more background on this complex topic. So as when you do get to the point of having to make decisions, that you have the necessary background. With me today, you've already met Eric. Well, you've met both Eric and Don before, but a little more background and where the three of us all fit together in this. Eric is our Fisheries Management Bureau Chief. In addition to his wealth of knowledge on fish management, Eric is also the lead on the statewide fisheries management plan, which Commissioner Byworth has already brought up. You'll hear us talking about more. And in addition to that, Eric, as a field biologist previously, also has substantial on-the-ground experience of working with these fish removal projects. I also have Don Scar here, who is the Access and Rec Bureau Chief. Don was previously in the position that Eric is in. And prior to that, Don was our pollution biologist. In all of these capacities, Don has been the Fisheries Division lead expert on all things related to the use of chemicals for fish removal. Don is also recognized nationally and internationally for his expertise with fish removal projects and is one of the lead trainers nationally for fish removal projects and a lead trainer with the American Fisheries Society. So among the three of us and Becky, we have a wealth of knowledge on this subject, and hopefully we can answer any of your questions. And we will keep our presentation brief to allow for plenty of time for questions. So just to start by talking about what is a fish removal project, we've defined those as projects that are purposefully designed to change some aspect of the fish population. They do not always involve killing fish. There are instances where the removal involves live capture and transfer to another water. There are many methods used for fish removal. We'll be focusing on projects that involve either mechanical removal or chemical removal. More details on both are in your packets. Population sampling is not fish removal. Population sampling uses tools to sample a portion of the population, which may be lethal, to make estimates on population structure and size. So as an example of that would be using gill nets to sample a population. Although lethal, these are not considered removal projects because they're not targeted to change the population. Removal projects can vary greatly in size, purpose, and scope. Some are very small scale, an example of which would be a small pond near Zortman with an illegally introduced goldfish population. Others are very large in scale and may have over a decade worth of work behind them before the actual removal part of the project begins. French Creek is a good example of a large-scale project. And French Creek has the purpose of a native species conservation project. The French Creek project planning started over a decade ago. The first phase was habitat restoration. The creek had previously been placer mined and had very poor fish habitat. The second phase of the project was construction of a barrier, and the final stage was the fish removal, with the first year of fish removal occurring last year and the second year scheduled for this year. French Creek is also a good example of how some of these projects have a large amount of partnerships involved in them, and Commissioner Byworth already made reference to that. And many include partnerships with federal agencies, landowners, watershed groups, private entities, angling organizations, other local organizations, and sister agencies. I'm going to hand it over to Eric Eric will give you a little bit of background on some of the concerns we hear in terms of changing angling opportunity. After Eric, Don is going to talk to you about specific concerns we hear related to the use of chemicals. And I will wrap things up briefly with some thoughts on next steps. So with that, I'll hand it over to Eric.
Slide it around here. Good afternoon again, Eric Roberts, Fish Management Bureau Chief. As Eileen said, I'm just going to touch on some of the impacts to angling opportunities. This is always a big part of the public comment component of these projects. Much like Hank described, the perception is you're coming in, you're going to kill the brook trout stream that I've been fishing for since I was a boy, and I'm never going to get a fish there again. The reality of it is many of these projects, native fish projects or otherwise, the intent is to provide a better fishery than the one that is currently there, be it a non-native fish or a sport fishery or whatever. In many of these projects, especially native fish projects, the native fish are better suited for the habitats that are available than non-native species. In many water bodies, the native species will provide a better fishing opportunity after the project is completed. Those are talking about chemical projects. In mechanical type projects, these primarily serve to reduce competition between species. And so as an angler, you may see the opportunity for one species to diminish, but the intent is to improve the other fishery or improve the other fishing opportunity out there. So gradually over time, you would expect it to get better. Although removal projects are often native species based, there's also typically a strong sport fish component. Even with many of our conservation projects, our removals related to conservation of species. Ultimately, the objective is to provide fishing opportunity after the project is complete. That includes catch and harvest of fish. Both of our species of native cutthroat trout are actually also sport fish. Arctic grayling are considered a sport fish. Bull trout are a sport fish. That's a big component of our conservation effort, is to provide those as conservation for those species, but also provide angling opportunity. That's a big component here of our native fish program. Unfortunately, all these projects, maybe unfairly, brook trout are often the target, especially with cutthroat projects. Another perception is that the department is anti-brook trout. That is not the case. There's plenty of brook trout opportunity in the state. And so we don't try to just single out a species just to remove it because we don't like it. Be it brook trout, rainbow trout, brown trout, any of our other popular non-native species. Those species have a place for management and plenty of spaces for our management in our state. We do feel also there's opportunities where we can take advantage to capitalize on native fish opportunities to conserve populations or to improve those populations. For complete removal of fisheries, such as chemical removal, we weigh these projects very heavily because it could be a few years of lost fishing opportunity while that fishery is offline. Whenever we do, like say a chemical treatment, fish are typically reintroduced into the system as soon as possible after treatment. That may be within a year or less. We'll try to get fish reintroduced in there. Sometimes it can take longer depending on the objectives of the project, maybe even up to a few years. Depending on project objectives, reintroduction can come in a variety of different forms. Fish may colonize from downstream, from upstream populations. Fish can be moved from nearby populations. Spawn may be collected from nearby populations and recolonize the stream through eggs or fry. Or catchable sized fish or other fingerling sized fish may be stocked from the hatchery. Again, just to jumpstart a fishery and get the fishing opportunity back out there on the ground as soon as we can. Typically, populations rebound pretty quickly. They recolonize pretty quickly. That's because after a fish treatment, after you remove all the fish from a water body, when you put fish back in there, there's minimal competition for habitat. And there's also typically abundant food because you haven't had fish for maybe a year or two, and the aquatic insects will really increase in there, and that's an important food source. So really, when we're evaluating each of these projects, be it mechanical, chemical, whatever, the loss of fishing opportunity is sort of the root of what we're balancing. Even based on conservation need, that loss of fishing opportunity is a heavy cost to bear. And ultimately, we may not proceed with the project just because a non-native fishery may be more popular than what we thought it was, or there's strong pushback from within a local community. These projects almost always have local support, grassroots supports from local angling organizations, local watershed groups, partner agencies. It's a very rare occasion that FWP is out on an island doing these projects on our own. And so the local buy-in is a big piece of this. And although the short-term fishing opportunity may be lost during a removal project, the expectation by the department is that a reestablished fishery is going to be better than the one that preceded it, providing improved long-term benefits over the short term to improve the fishing opportunity, I should say. And so that's typically the end game of this. We want to leave a water body and a fishery better than when we began, whenever we're implementing any of these fish removal projects. Pass it back to Eileen to slide the computer.
Hand it over to Dawn now.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the commission. I'm Don Scar, Recreation Access Bureau Chief. Talk a little bit about pesticides. Most of you are likely not familiar with pesticides, so I'll provide you a brief explanation about them and in their use. Hopefully that'll help you interpret and understand many of the comments we're likely to get during the public comment period. Piscocides, as we've been calling them, obviously are pesticides for fish, or fish toxicants, we also like to call them. The only Piscocides currently registered in the United States have a compound called rotenone as the active ingredient. Rotenone is produced by the roots of certain legumes growing in the Southern Hemisphere. Native peoples use the ground up roots to collect fish from ponds for eating, which is how it first came to the attention of American fish managers. And rotenone itself acts at the cellular level by stopping the production of compounds which catalyze crucial metabolic processes in the body. One big advantage of rotenone is that it is a natural compound and that it breaks down quickly in the environment to harmless products. So that's important to keep in mind going forward here in my discussion. It is considered a restricted use pesticide, meaning you have training and continuing education requirements to purchase it. FWP typically has 10 to 15 certified applicators who meet this requirement at any one time. The application techniques and procedures for handling rotenone are tightly regulated by the US EPA, Montana DEQ, Montana Department of Agriculture. It typically takes several years before licensed applicators are proficient in the use of it. So a testament to the high standard of use for this chemical are the label itself, which is 6 pages long. There's a companion standard operating procedures manual that's 163 pages. And then we have a 10-page FWP Piscocide policy as well, all documents that must be followed. So when we get to the treatments using rotenone are typically, Eric kind of described those, but they range from springs to small to large streams, ponds, lakes, reservoirs, and entire watersheds as well. Because rotenone is placed directly into the water to kill fish, it understandably receives a lot of scrutiny from the public when we propose these projects. Our environmental assessments, therefore, go to considerable length to disclose the impacts and the measures we take to protect human health and the environment. So typically our environmental impacts will describe the impacts to the physical and human environment. When we evaluate the impacts on the physical environment, we look at impacts to land resources, water quality and quantity, air quality, vegetation, and fish and wildlife, both aquatic and terrestrial. When we look at the impacts to the human environment, we look at impacts of noise, land use, the risk and the health hazards, community impacts, public services, recreation, historic resources, kind of all the normal things in an environmental assessment. So the most frequent comments we are likely to get as part of this collection of projects are concerns over impacts to non-target organisms. That typically is fish-eating birds, stream insects, livestock. Get comments about potential contamination of groundwater, and then human health impacts from drinking the contaminated water or breathing contaminated air. And then lastly, the lost recreational opportunity. So I can tell you now, because we've addressed many of these issues many times before, what the responses often are. Some of those impacts cannot be avoided, such as the other gill-breathing aquatic organisms that are living in the water body being treated are going to be impacted heavily oftentimes, but typically those populations recover quickly on their own. Impacts to groundwater are non-existent because rotenone does not move into aquifers, but we often monitor people's wells nonetheless to give them some reassurance of that fact. Impacts to human exposure at the treatment site are avoided by site control, keeping them away from the project area. We can reduce human exposure to zero, essentially, and we do with every project. Impacts to recreation are mitigated by the time of year treatment occurs. We'll often schedule it to minimize those impacts, or quickly restocking of fish, something Eric's already discussed. So that's just a quick summary of some of the things that we'll see as part of the public comment period. Wanted you to be aware of those and as we engage the public on these projects. Thank you.
So just to wrap up briefly, we thought it might be helpful to talk a little bit about how we see next steps moving forward. And we're sort of looking at that in three lumps, the immediate issue of projects that have been put on hold, the short term of those projects that may be in the works for next year, and then the long term of how to move forward. And I've got some ideas that we would like to share on all of those. So with the projects that were planned for this year, we obviously had to make a course correction on those, and all of those have been put on hold until we receive commission approval. Once projects are approved, whether that's at the June meeting or at a different meeting, we'll restart the projects wherever they were left off in the process. Some are midway through the EA process. Some have not started the EA process. Some are ready for field work to begin. As we move forward past this year, we'd like to propose a process that involves an initial endorsement to proceed from the commission, followed at a later date by a decision on approval of the project to commence. The endorsement would occur very early on in the planning stages prior to MIPA being initiated. Your endorsement would allow us to start the MIPA process and other planning processes. Sometimes the MIPA process, especially on larger projects, may take upwards of 2 or 3 years to complete. Others could be completed in a couple of months. Once the MIPA process is complete, we would then come back to you with the public comments from the EA, and at that time ask you to consider the projects for approval. In order to make the process more streamlined, we'd like to try to batch as many endorsements and approval requests as possible. Additionally, we are hoping to use the statewide management plan, which needs revised prior to January of 2023, as an avenue to bring you projects for endorsement. With the statewide management plan revisions, we're looking to make the plan more prescriptive and shortening the duration of the plan to 4 years instead of the current 8, and also make the removal projects more prominent within the plan. The plan will not be revised in time for endorsement of removal projects for 2022. So our thought was to bring you a batch of projects for endorsement in winter of 2021. After that, we will work to have the endorsements included with the approval of the management plan. In order to have the management plan in place by January of 2023, as required by the new statute, we'll be starting to work on the management plan soon, and we'll bring you a proposed plan sometime in the second half of 2022. There are, of course, those emergency cases that we cannot plan for. Those are primarily related to illegal fish introductions, and those we would bring to you on an as-needed basis. With that, we're all available for questions, and hopefully what we've provided you with today and in the materials has helped fill in some of those gaps that you may have had with this topic.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
I guess I have one question for Mr. Scar. You went over most of them, but the stock water, what happens if that pond or what you're going to be removing the fish is a stock water spot? So then what do you do? How do you fix that? Or how long does it take? I mean, how long would it be before the stock could drink from the water?
Yeah, I guess several questions there. It's pretty unusual that we treat a pond that livestock are actively drinking out of. When we do treat in those kind of situations, we always make arrangements for treating it at a time when livestock are not in the area or can be controlled, provided water off-site so that they aren't drinking it. You know, fortunately, in the middle of the summer, the compound degrades pretty quickly. In a couple of weeks, it's gone totally. But we mainly try to deal with that with just making sure that the water and the livestock are not in the same place at the same time. The label does not actually specifically speak to that, but nonetheless, it's something we, try. That is, it's not prohibited explicitly on the label, but we try to avoid that at all possible times.
All right, I don't know where that Zortman pond is, but I don't know very many bodies of water in my area that aren't used for livestock. So that's kind of what piqued my interest, I guess.
Gotcha. Yeah, if we were up there doing that, we would do everything we can to separate animals and water when we do a treatment.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions from any of the commissioners?
Madam Chairman.
Go ahead, Commissioner Tabor.
Madam Chair, and
Yep,
I'm not
go
sure
ahead,
who
Commissioner
this.
Tabor.
Yeah, that was Madam Chair, and I'm not sure who this goes to, but as a technique, and I don't know where it fits in because it looks like you basically kill and then replenish. And I remember being involved in a project in the Bob Marshall where it didn't feel like utilizing the chemicals was the right answer. And so they went to a technique of genetic swamping as an alternative. And it was deemed, super successful. And it was able to get groups of people that were somewhat warring over the issue to come together. Nobody disputed wanting to get the species that should be there back there. It was more about the two impacts that the utilization of the chemicals have, the potential impact on other wildlife, in this case, back in the wilderness, the fact that there were other wilderness issues, and values that might be violated by bringing a chemical in the wilderness area. But the third area was the loss of recreation, and the particular lake, and I can't even recall the name of it anymore, was a super destination area within the Bob Marshall that lots of different audiences would frequent that lake. And I know I received, and maybe the other commissioners might receive that. I think there's a similar project being proposed in the ABO. And I had at least one outfitter who takes their clients there reach out with a great deal of concern that they were going to utilize the chemical. And I don't even know where that is in the proposal stage. That may be something we'll be seeing downstream. I hadn't seen anything on it yet. Anyway, long-winded question to say, where does genetic swamping fit into this categorization? When is it a tool you either are or not considering? Because I don't even see it mentioned in any of the literature that was proposed to us today. And I don't know when you consider it an alternative or when you don't.
Commissioner Tabor, those were all great points. I will let Eric handle the genetic swamping question. That is another tool. It's not necessarily something we consider as a removal tool, but I'll let Eric address that. Before handing it to Eric, just to help I believe the project that you referenced in terms of the one in the wilderness that you've been receiving comments on, that's the Buffalo Fork project in Region 5. That is on your list currently. If that's a large project in a wilderness area, if that were to be approved this year, the actual removal treatment would happen next year. With those large projects, there's so much early field work that has to be done in preparation of the actual removal. So that's one that's on the list for this year, but the actual removal wouldn't occur this year. But that's, I believe, the Buffalo Fork project that you were referring to. But and that one, recently the comment period on the EA closed, but no decision notice has been issued. That was one that we put on hold, when this all started, and have not yet issued a decision notice. But I will let Eric answer your genetic swamping question.
Thanks, Eileen. To get tangled up in cords here. Nice thing about screens. Commissioner Tabor, too, just on that Buffalo Creek, regional staff has been working closely with the outfitters associated with that also, and we're aware of the concerns, and the regional staff has been working with folks down there too. So I'll throw that in there, and just kind of we're aware of those concerns and trying to work through that as well. The genetic component, genetics are a huge piece, especially with a lot of our native fish projects. And there are a lot of opportunities where swamping, just like you described, is a really viable tool and a really effective tool. And those are typically best served if, say, you have a population of West Slope cutthroat trout with a very low degree of hybridization. Oftentimes they're hybridized with Yellowstone cutthroat trout because they've been stocked other places in the basin, or they'll be slightly hybridized with rainbow trout sometimes as well. The idea is to bring in pure cutthroat West Slope we'll assume west slopes on the bob for this example. So what we would do is we would bring in west slope cutthroat eggs from other peer populations, what we know are peer conservation populations of cutthroat. And we will put those, often they're put in, they're called remote site incubators. So what you do is you actually spawn eggs, give them a few days to harden, then you're putting them out into their specialized 5-gallon buckets out in the field, basically. And it lets those eggs grow and hatch out to fry. And whenever they hit the fry stage, they just swim out of the bucket and into the stream. And so you're adding those fish into the stream. And the idea is called swamping is because you're trying to swamp out the hybrid genetics that you get from either the Yellowstone cutthroats or the rainbows or whatever's causing the hybridization. So you never get to that point where it's 100% pure population again, but a lot of times you can get to the stage where it's still a 95% pure, 98% pure, where it is still enough where we're confident saying, yeah, that's still a west slope cutthroat population, and it's still a viable and resilient population. And that's where swamping comes in. It's not included in this packet because we're really not removing any fish. The idea is we're just adding genetics in there to swamp out the hybrid component that's present in that population.
Madam Chair, follow up.
Yes, follow up. Go ahead.
So Eric, I think that as I recall in the project in the Bob, it was a two-step process. That the swamping was the technique to try to either lessen, certainly not eradicate, but lessen the invasive species so that the endemic species could survive. And the only reason I bring that up is it wound up being the tool that the warring parties could agree on, if you will, because I do think that there are some projects here, and it very well could be the Buffalo Creek one would be an example, where there's some very high levels of sensitivity about the utilization of a chemical, in particular in the wilderness, as was the case in the Bob. I mean, there, as you well know, there are groups that follow the wilderness that take it to a whole different level when it's, principles of wilderness and wilderness character. And the other, I think, thing that's complicated here is the transportation issues of trying to get whatever remediation into the wilderness and, the usage of choppers and things like that. That was not done in the Bob. Everything was carried in remarkably through, mules, and it wound up being a great project for everybody to rally behind. And I think it's been deemed a super success. And the only reason I bring it up is not to advocate one way or for the other, but it seems like a tool in the toolkit that heretofore, at least looking at what I'm looking at, isn't even mentioned, isn't even an option made available to us to consider when we ultimately contemplate approving or disapproving any of these projects. And so I just wanted to get clarity from you as to where in the stage you guys assess whether you would or wouldn't use that technique. I assume on all of these, it probably crossed somebody's mind, and for whatever reason, it wasn't deemed the most effective method or technique, and it was ruled out. Just knowing that and knowing that somebody went through that puts my mind at ease that, okay, the professionals contemplated it, and this application or that application doesn't make sense. I will probably ask, if not now, certainly in June, why it wouldn't make sense for Buffalo Creek. Just because it seems like they're running into the same exact issues we did when we were contemplating the project in the Bob. So.
Yeah, and Commissioner Tabor, I would say that there's different tools for different situations, and the one you describe on the Bob sounds like a different situation than what we're talking about on Buffalo Creek and the Buffalo Fork. It's different when you're talking about just slight degrees of hybridization, whereas Buffalo Fork is currently a rainbow trout fishery. And that's causing problems with conservation programs downstream into the national park. and the way they're trying to manage things. So they're vastly different, not vastly different, but they're different situations. And our folks in the field, everybody talks a lot. There's a meeting annually to talk about the different chemical treatments that happen through a year. It's called the Piscocite Committee. And that's where people talk about projects that are upcoming, as well as projects that were completed in a previous year or previous years. And everybody's learning from these projects, and we're also learning more about the tools that are available. And so we're very deliberate with these projects, and very mindful of when we're acting and what tools we're using, because there's trade-offs with whatever the tool is, and that depends on what objectives you want. And I'll again, the Buffalo Creek one is that it's something that's got a lot of interest from the wilderness folks, and that is something. I don't know the best conduit. Maybe Quentin could help us out here, but maybe there's a way that the region could provide some information that could be helpful to the commission. We'll call you guys the commission. Provide for Region 5 to provide some additional information to the commission to help better inform you with what's going on Buffalo Creek.
All right.
Madam Chair, one final comment on that.
Sure.
So I think in that spirit, Eric, what would be super helpful is that comparative of the difference between the projects. I do remember a very high concentration of invasive population in that lake in the Bob. But like you said, it's probably quite different. Just knowing that and recognizing it and putting that in the literature will probably be super helpful, I think, in terms of the public and anyone else who might want to comment on it, because if you don't comment on it, then it won't look as if you looked into it as a viable alternative. And if you do and say it was really thoughtfully processed out, but unlike other areas where we've done this successfully in Montana, this particular one isn't eligible for these reasons. I think that'll go a long way in helping the public, absorb it, as well as helping the commissioners absorb, a lot of what is coming our way. Because I've had a lot of people reach out on this particular one only because they know I was a wilderness outfitter and I understand the wilderness issues as well as probably anyone. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Commissioner
Thank you.
Tabor, Chair Robinson, sorry, just to wrap a bow on this. So we do have some staff that have spent a lot of time working on genetic swamping projects. Matt Boyer up in Region 1 comes to mind. What we will do is we will work on putting together a brief sort of white paper similar to the information we've provided you for this meeting that talks specifically about genetic swamping, where it works well, where it may not work that well, and then we'll specifically put in that paper why it's not being considered as the preferred tool for the project sites. So you can expect to see that from us sometime in the near future.
Thank you. Commissioner Walsh had to get off of the meeting, so he is no longer on the training. Is there any other questions?
Madam Chair, I had a question.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, this is probably for Eric or Dr. Rice. The schedule that you all sent out with regards to the projects we'll be considering June 24th. A number of them indicate that they've already had treatments, and it's multi-year treatment for the Piscocide. Assuming we won't be discussing those projects that they're already ongoing. And that's one assumption I'll have you comment on. Two, there's a number of them that have EAs that are either currently being drafted or one expired. And I know some of these fall under NEPA as Commissioner Byers pointed out, fall under NEPA or the MEPA process. And what's your experience been with EA process, and how often do these projects get canceled or changed because of the EA process? Those
are great questions, Commissioner Siebel. I'll talk a little bit about the first part, which was in relation to the multi-year projects. And I'm looking to Dawn or Eric to answer the second part of your question. There are some projects that are on the list that involve multi-year treatments, and many of the projects do require at least 2 years of treatment. When this all came to light, the question about authority and getting commission approval, those projects that have not received commission approval, even if they have had a previous treatment, those ones are still on hold, awaiting your approval moving forward. I keep referring to French Creek because that's a great example for a lot of these. French Creek is one of those multi-year projects, but that was previously approved through the commission because it also has future fisheries involvement. So you'll see the list has that's where like there's not a cookie cutter project on this list. So there's a little bit of both there. So if the easiest way to describe it is if the project has not been approved by the commission, it is on hold regardless of where it's at in the process. As far as what your question about the changes to projects after the EA process, Dawn Scar is best to answer that. So I'm going to pass that along to Dawn.
Thank you.
Yeah, Commissioner Siebel. Yeah, in my career here, there's only been a couple times where we've actually, backed off of a project once we got to the EA stage. And it's normally been because of a lot of local opposition. Normally we vet that in advance before we even get to an EA stage. So I think, that's probably why our success rate is so high, is because we, make sure we, dot all our I's and cross our T's on issues that are of concern to people before we go forward with the EA. But, I can think of one particular instance where we didn't go forward and we just continued to use mechanical means to suppress the fish in question. It wasn't perfect, but it was, the only option we had. So hope that helps.
Follow up.
Sure.
Mr. Scar, so with regards to the EA process, and I know that those can take a considerable amount of time, what do you think is what's the best practice? And I'm thinking about this in terms of Dr. Rice's idea about how we do this going forward. What is the best practice with regards to timing of the EA completion and timing of the commission and the public process that's going to be involved with the commission review of these projects? I guess that's something I want to consider. What's the best timing relative to the EA and that commission process?
Well, I mean, the EA sure does seem to be a great way to receive public comment, because that's vehicle in which you've laid out all the impacts. We always have different options, alternatives as part of the EA, alternatives that we considered for doing the removal effort and discarded. So, I think that's environmental assessments are really well suited to evaluating fish removal projects. And, we chose that many years ago as the way to do it. We could engage the people other ways. Oftentimes over the years, if it's been a particularly controversial one, we'll have public hearings, or not public hearing, public meetings to go along during the EA comment period. And that's always an option as well. But having the comments through the EA process available to you, I think gives you a pretty good range of the issues out there and how people are feeling about it. So having the EA after we get endorsement from you and before your approval we think that's pretty well positioned in there.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Go ahead, Commissioner Byerth.
Thanks, Madam Chair. This is for Don or Dr. Rice, whichever, or Eric. So I remember harkening back to about 2000, we started planning on Cherry Creek. Since then, I've personally been associated with probably a dozen fish removal or native species restoration project. Can you tell me how many projects have been through over the years? Just roughly. I don't expect you to nail it right on the head, but it seems like there's been a lot.
I'm gonna hand that over to the elder person in the group. Don has more experience in this than anybody.
Yeah, nice to be called the elder person
Nice to be
here.
appreciated.
So since 1990, we've probably done about 115 projects. You know, in recent years, we've been averaging 4 to 6. You know, what we've got on the taps for this year is actually quite unusual in the number. So it's normally a lot less than this, just happened to be a big year. And I remembered that, and that's not dementia.
No, I wasn't.
That's pretty good, Don. Follow up, please.
Go ahead, Commissioner Byerth.
And so of that, over 100 projects, how many of those would have been approved by the commission through future fisheries? I mean, again, just ballpark it, or use that unbelievable memory of yours and
Yeah.
Roma.
Yeah. You know, I don't, yeah, everyone's shaking their heads. I don't think we have a good sense of that.
I'd say so. It's
Yeah.
yeah. That's a great question, Commissioner Byerth. If you look on the table that we showed you, I think again, I keep using French Creek as an example. I think that was actually approved in 2013, that far back by the commission through future fisheries. Typically projects with barriers have some sort of future fisheries component. And so in reviewing the list of projects that we had on the table for this year, what we did was we actually went back through the materials provided to the commission during the future fisheries discussion. We went back through the transcripts, and what we were looking in there was, in those description of future fisheries projects, did it mention the removal part of the project? Of the 22 that you have on your list right now, 8 of them had that component, and all of them have some sort of barrier or habitat funded by future fisheries. Obviously, there's a lot of projects that do not have future fisheries funding. Those typically tend to be ones with other mitigation dollars, for instance, from BPA or Northwestern, order projects that don't involve a habitat or a barrier component, and are funded primarily with general license and DJ money. So that's a long way of saying I'm not sure of those 100 and whatever since 1990 of how many of those had future fisheries in them. We could certainly dig through the records and try to find out, but I'm guessing it's somewhere in the 3rd range is our expert random guess right now. Sorry, we can't give you a more definitive than that.
Well, thank you. Follow up, Madam Chair.
Sure. One more follow up. Yep. Go ahead.
Okay, so we have a universe of those that have been before the commission. How many of that universe went through the MEPA process or NEPA process, so that had public review? And of those, I have another aspect of the question is funding tied up in those projects. Where does that funding go to? And where does that money? But I'll just let you take that off and stop.
Okay. Well, all of our projects, the simple answer is all of our projects go through MIPA, or if they're federally led through NEPA. You know, all of our management actions require us to follow MIPA. So the easy answer is all of them have had a MIPA process. Like Dawn mentioned, that MIPA process can be extensive, with some of them taking 2 or 3 years to go through the entire process. And that includes, you know, data gathering, baseline information, as well as the extensive public comment periods. We often do public meetings. We'll also often do scoping prior to the EA, especially on the larger projects. We'll scope them first, then start MIPA. I think that you were cutting out a little bit, but I think the second part of your question was about the funding, correct? So right now, I'm not aware of any project where funding has fallen through during the development planning processes, MIPA processes. Obviously, sometimes we have grant money or specific money for that specific project. If the project were not to happen ever, like if it was completely canceled, we would not be able to use that money on another project unless the agreement was amended in some way. Oftentimes, if there's a delay to a project, we can get the grants extended or an allowance to extend the period over which we can spend the money. Does that help answer that question?
I guess that helped. That was part of the other part. Sorry if I broke up. Was where does that money go? Who are we paying? Contractors, outfitters?
Oh, okay. So what do we actually spend the money on? Okay, sorry, you broke up, and so it varies on the project. It's everything from purchasing of supplies, materials, time. We do hire for a lot of the backcountry type work. We'll hire an outfitter to help pack in supplies. Some of them will have helicopter time, staff time, chemical. Well, I had that in supplies.
Habitat expenditures.
Oh, then, you know, barrier construction is expensive. Concrete materials, construction costs, habitat improvements are expensive. These really large scale projects over the length of time that it often takes, they're large projects with a lot of investment. You know, and then you've got the smaller private pond type ones. And often with those where it's an illegal introduction or basic expenses, the chemical and staff time. And I think we gave some numbers on the chart that talks about the range of expense of the projects.
So I have a question, I guess. So on the 8 that were approved by the commission, how much generally is spent on the project before you come to the commission for approval? How far into the projects are you?
So of the 8 that's approved, what we're bringing to the commission is typically the future fish. So the commission has to approve the future fisheries expenditures. So that's what we're bringing to you. That is typically early on in the process. Again, it's typically habitat work or barrier construction, which happens long before we get to the removal stage. You know, again, using the example of French Creek, the habitat work was done about 10 years ago. The barrier was done 4 years ago.
2 years ago, finished.
So yeah, oftentimes it'll take multiple years to get done. So sort of 2 to 4 years ago for barrier construction, and then removal started last year.
Okay.
Does that answer your question, Chair?
Yes, yes, thank you. Are there any other questions from the commission? All right, thank you. This has been very informational. Is there anything, Quentin, do you have any, or Becky, do you have any closing thoughts?
Chair, I would just offer, again, a thank you to all of the commissioners for taking time today to come to hear this presentation. Again, recognizing that June 24th, the commission day, will be a busy day. That agenda will be a long one, this being but one of many topics. And so thinking that this will help that conversation happen a little more efficiently on the day when other topics are on the agenda. So very much appreciate the time you've given us today. Certainly, Chair Robinson and other commissioners would look for any feedback to make it better the next time. And then to restate Director Warsek's opening remarks, we have found these informational settings when the decision is not looming at the end of the discussion, we found them to be a really productive forum. So certainly, please do let us know if there's another topic you'd like us to frame in an informational setting like this. And I suspect you will see more of those requests from us as well. Thank you, Chair.
And Director, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Chair Robinson, I wanted to also make the offer. We threw a lot at you today. As you think about this, if you think there would be other materials we can provide that would be helpful prior to the time when you're making a decision on this, please reach out and let us know. We're happy to pull together anything that would help prior to the meeting, like Quentin mentioned. And we know that June meeting's going to be busy. So if it would be helpful, please just reach out and let us know what other information you think would be helpful to have.
I would encourage everyone to do that too. So we can, thank you. Director, did you have any closing thoughts?
Madam Chair, yes, I did. And thank you all, first of all, everybody for participating. Thought it went good. Like I said, we can continue to work on fine tuning these a little bit. And said, if anything comes up that you want to talk about, that something like this would help, please let us know. And I appreciate your time today.
All right. Thank you. I think that wraps up our meeting for today. Look forward to June 24th.
Thanks again. Take
Thank
care,
you all.
everybody.
Thanks all.